Hello, I am Amanda Cassar, and welcome back to the Financial Secrets Revealed podcast. We have a late entry for season 2 with the interview of the lovely Kasey Rogers. Now, Kasey has been involved in nearly every aspect of the entertainment industry from the sound of it, and she's currently based in the Berkshires in West Massachusetts. Welcome along, Kasey.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you on board.
Likewise.
Now, I understand that you were in a financially abusive marriage. You didn't probably realize it at the start, but went on to understand this more after the death of your husband and wrote a book about it that started as, I guess, just a catharsis for you, but sort of took on its own life. Can you tell us about your story and how that happened?
Oh, absolutely. Um, I was probably as surprised as anyone else when I finally realized that I was in a financially abusive marriage. I was married for 12 years before we had children. And although my husband worked, he had his own business, he was a director producer in the film industry. But I worked in New York City at a number of very, very high profile production companies first, and then I moved on to various ad agencies. And my salary basically guaranteed us things like healthcare and mortgage payments and everything else. And I was happy to do it initially because I was trying to be supportive. He was very talented. And there was always that promise, well, someday you'll get your turn. Well,
Nice.
someday never happened.
Nice when it happened.
Yeah, yeah, it never quite happened. And when I was approaching my 40s, I started to get really antsy because I wanted to start a family. And at that point, I had been commuting 2.5 hours each way into work every day, and life was just getting really old very quickly.
Yeah, that's
And
difficult, isn't it? It's a lot of time out.
yeah, I made the best of it because I did a lot of writing. It sounds really crazy, but I actually wrote on the bus when I was traveling into New York. And this was before there were like little laptops and things of that nature. But I was actually working on my own project. I wrote a musical. And when I started realizing that life was kind of passing me by, I forced my husband's hand in some ways, and finally he decided, all right, now is the time to start a family. And when I was 42, I actually had girl boy twins. And
Wow.
yeah, it was wonderful. Except for the part where people used to say, "Oh, your grandchildren are so cute."
Thanks for nothing.
I don't like that so much. But he was working for the first time in a full-time job, and I stayed working for a couple years. But because I was working so far away, even though I had cut back my hours, there was such a disconnect between the children and their care and me. And he was never really home because he had to leave early in the morning to get into work. So, a kind of like mini crisis prompted me to just quit. I'd had enough. And it wasn't until I was not the main breadwinner that I realized how restricted I was financially. I mean, he had always kind of pulled these things on me like, it was okay to spend money he earned on film equipment or, doing a music video or whatever he could to promote his work. But when I needed to do something or wanted to do something, the money was always scrutinized, even though I was the one that was earning it. And a couple years, actually, it wasn't even a couple years, shortly after I quit my job, I also was fighting like extreme fatigue and we found out that I actually had uh, tumors on my parathyroid gland that were causing this immense exhaustion. I thought it was just twins and running
I
away
was going to
from
say, I
them.
would have thought immediately, yeah, twin babies at 42. There's got to be some tiredness coming in here, but on
Well,
top of that, health issues as well. Wow.
yeah, so I kind of assumed that's what it was, but then I started to get really scared because there were times that I was just so exhausted. I literally could not like push the stroller home from a park that was like a block and a half away. So I got help, and I was diagnosed with the tumors on my parathyroid gland. I was like operated on. But during that time, my husband was always belittling me, berating me, you're lazy, you're inept. I mean, all these things started to come out, and it started to really impact my self-esteem because even though I was working as a teacher, and but I was making a fraction of what I used to make. And as time went on, he started doing things that really alarmed me, like, just these power trips. Like one time we were like scheduled to go back and visit some relatives, and we stayed in a hotel at night. And I wanted to shower in the morning instead of showering at night, so I wouldn't disturb the kids. And in the morning he threw a fit because he was ready to leave and I wanted to hop in the shower, and it was like, well, if you go in the shower, I'm going to take your purse and I'm going to pack the car and leave you with with no money. And he started doing things like that more and more often. So now I had no money. I mean, we spent an enormous amount on fertility treatments, and that all came out of my pocket. So I always say the kids are mine. I bought
Bought
and
and
paid
paid
for
for.
them. All he did was donate the sperm. um,
So the first for you then was the power imbalance sort of tilted more in his favor after you were the
mhm.
breadwinner. Now we've got the emotional abuse starting and the
Yes.
lowering of your self-esteem because of the constant taunts. And so there wasn't too much of the financial abuse at this stage, or looking back, it all sort of was interconnected.
It was all interconnected because he started scrutinizing things even more and more. Like if I went to the grocery store, and again, this is going back like 25 years ago, but if I went to the grocery store and I bought what we normally would have bought for groceries when it was just the two of us, and I was using my money, when we were using his money, it was always too much. I was always spending too much. I was always questioned about, you know, like where the money was coming from, where was it going? And those were never things that were questioned when I was the one that was bringing in the lion's share of the income. He had full access to all monies that I earned. But once I started working less and making less, suddenly everything was scrutinized. But I still didn't connect it because back then the word financial abuse really wasn't resonating.
Yeah,
You
wasn't probably
know,
even invented as a style of
yeah.
abuse then, was it? It was all part of I guess now it would fall under the domestic violence
hmm
and
Yeah.
possibly emotional abuse. Yeah.
Yeah. But well, what happened with us, it was a lot of fate kind of intervened. Um, my husband got laid off from his job, and he had always wanted to move to Canada because at one point we had a vacation property there and we had sold it so he could buy some investment properties, and we could have a rental income, which also didn't work. But we opened up a business up there, or we decided we were going to, like, we had a property, we were going to turn it into a business and a residence and have rental income. And we decided to open up a little cafe. And 4 months after we moved up there, he came downstairs from the office one day and he said he got a call from his old boss, and he had, without even asking me, taken a job back in the US. So he left me in Canada with 9-year-old twins and a new business. And I think in some ways he kind of I'm not really sure what he expected, whether he wanted me to fail or what it was, but with him gone, I suddenly started to realize that I could breathe again. I started to be confident, like as people used to come into the cafe and they loved our food. And, I started getting involved in artistic events. And, I did like spoken word up there. And as he was gone, I just started to really realize the impact that he had on my life and my sense of self esteem. Um, so as I was up there for almost 4 years before he started doing things like he said he wanted me to move back to the States. He was missing too much of the children's life, which was really kind of hard to take because he only saw them every 2 weeks. Um, and he forced my hand by stopping, like, he wouldn't support the children. He wouldn't pay any of the bills that we had in common. He had run up a lot of credit card debt. And after consulting an attorney, she convinced me that the only way to deal with the situation, because I felt we were headed for divorce, was to go back and deal with it. So I closed my business very sadly. I was really sorry to leave. And when I got down there, that's when everything became very, very obvious in terms of his desire to control me by using finances against me. I was driving a vehicle that had no, like, it had an instrument panel, but it was faulty. So I could never tell whether I had gas in the car, how fast I was going, any of those things. He refused to like get a cell phone for me or even a landline, like a $12 landline, so that I could contact the school in case of an emergency. I had a computer that had a faulty input jack, so a lot of times I couldn't even, use the internet. And yet he wanted me to look for a job, and he wanted me to contribute to the household income and find work at a time when the economy was really, really bad. This is when, the US was going through a recession. And anytime he gave me money, he wanted receipts. He wanted to know, if he gave me $20, did that go in the gas tank? If he gave me money for groceries, did I buy groceries with it? And that kind of forced me to really evaluate our relationship even more than I had been. And I tried to figure out a way to leave. And I did
So
leave
the kids
once.
are young teenagers about now, I'm guessing.
Yeah, at that point they were 12, which is a really, really hard age. And they were very devastated about leaving Canada. They loved it there. I loved it. It was our home. We considered it our home. They really regressed socially and emotionally. My son started like really exhibiting anxiety about going to school. They were always A students and their grades started to decline. Um, my husband and I fought constantly. Nothing I did satisfied him. If I moved a piece of furniture, he wanted it moved back. Like everything was about his ability to control every element of my life. So I took refuge at my brother's house for about a week, and then he begged me to come back, and I did. And primarily because the kids really missed our pets. It's like we had like a dog and three cats, and they were like, and they didn't really like staying with my brother and his wife. They were very strict. So we went back, and 6 months later, we found out that he was dying. He had cancer, and he was very, very ill. Like the doctors that we first saw gave him literally a couple of weeks to live because he had a tumor on his vertebrae that had like compromised his neck. So when you think of a broken neck, you think of somebody stumbling and falling and breaking their neck, but he was actually walking around with a clinical broken neck. Um, so the prognosis was very grim, and he passed away about 6 months after the diagnosis of esophageal cancer.
So,
And
had
the
there been
abuse,
any plans made for the family? Was there insurances in place or anything along those lines to look after you?
he refused. He during our relationship, um, especially towards the end when things started to get really hostile, when he would have had an opportunity because he didn't have a diagnosis, his words were, "I do not want you to profit from my death." So he refused to get out insurance. And when he passed away, I was left with not only medical debt, I was left with tons of credit card debt. I had no income. And he basically left us in poverty. Um, so it was a tough couple of years after
Yeah,
he passed
wow.
away. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So all this perfect storm, and I'm guessing there's also very mixed emotions about his illness and death. There must have been some relief there, that he's no longer suffering, but also that he's no longer torturing and abusing you as
Hmm.
well, which must be very conflicting.
It was very conflicting. And I have to say, I really slid into a depression because I had no support system. We were living in the town he grew up with, and we had been living with his relatives for a while. So, of course, they were mourning the passing of the brother and the son, and I was mourning the passing of my children's father, and
Of
he was a
course,
man that
yeah.
I loved for so long. So, when I started writing the memoir, one of the phrases that I used quite frequently is I needed to untangle all of these emotions because I hated him and I loved
Yeah.
him. And
Yep.
you know, I didn't want him to die. I mean, that was the
Of
last thing that
course.
I wanted. I just didn't want him to continually, like spew these words of resentment and condemnation over just about everything about me. It wasn't that I did things, it was like he resented who I was as a human being. Um,
So when you look back now and the
mhm.
emotional abuse sort of starting when you were no longer main breadwinner, do you look back and see if there were triggers that brought this on? Were there any changes for him that, because it doesn't sound like, this was the beautiful man you married and wanted to start a family with. It sounds like, what did it sneak up or was it a snap? How did you find it in your relationship?
I think because we had such an unusual marriage, I left at 4 o'clock every morning. I didn't get home sometimes until 8 or 9. I was either in the city, sometimes I slept over in the city. I was very active with the play that I was working on. So I was home mostly on the weekends, and it was kind of that honeymoon thing, like, oh my God, I'm getting to spend time with the man that I love. And we'd go out for dinner and we'd go antiquing and we'd go rafting. And everything was about the pleasures in life. There were none of the conflicts because we weren't together. We were always
Yeah.
on opposite ends of like jobs and stuff. So it wasn't
A
really
12-year
until I
honeymoon.
had,
No, well, most people don't get that, do they?
yeah, exactly.
12-year dating honeymoon phase.
Yeah. But I think that created like a false security because we didn't have to deal with like some of the bigger questions.
Real
Um,
life.
yeah, it's like usually when you spend time together is when you discover, those little things about one another. I mean, there were definitely signs when I started to look back. Um, like one of the things that was became very, very apparent was that he not only tried to control me financially, he always wanted to control my time. So if I got on the phone with a friend, or it never happened with a relative, but it was only like my girlfriends. It was always like when I got off the phone, well, they're just using you. They just think that you're going to become this big, Broadway person, and they're just, snuggling up to you to be good friends with you. Like any friendship that I had wasn't authentic because he believed that they were just trying to use me and benefit from my talent and connections. Um, and that was really hard to take because again, I started to believe it. I started to question, oh, well, maybe, you know,
Projection much?
yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah,
exactly what it was.
yeah.
But I didn't know that
Awful.
at the
Of
time.
course not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you look back now with the beautiful, benefit of hindsight, do you see some signs that you wish you'd taken a bit more notice of, or, trusted your gut a little more? Are there things you look back and went, yeah, should have stopped that in its tracks or made different
Hmm.
decisions? So what are some of those, Kasey?
I was always afraid to confront him after I stopped working about some of his behavior because at that point I really didn't have the means to leave. And there were times that alarm bells went off, like that time that, he threatened to leave me in the hotel room with no money. That's just like a drop in the bucket for things that occurred between the two of us. And they were always like these threats. Um, and at that point, I remember on numerous occasions being completely beside myself and just crying hysterically to various girlfriends. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. It seemed to be coming out of left field, but it wasn't. It wasn't coming out of left field because I should have seen the imbalance of our relationship where again, whenever he needed to buy a piece of equipment or he wanted to produce a music video, his money was never called into question. Mine always was. Um, and and I think that some of the mistakes that I made were really not protecting myself financially by having some investments and things of that nature that would have protected me if something happened to him. Even if he didn't, you know, act out the way that he ended up acting out, I just really wish that some of the things that I was leery of in the very beginning of our marriage by, kind of almost ignoring my instincts towards financial survival. And again, it wasn't about like him thinking about abusing me. It was always kind of, well, what would happen if he died? What would I do? Would I be able to survive on my own financially? Um, I didn't heed any of those precautions. I just threw them to the wind and just went along with whatever he had to say.
Did any girlfriends or family members or anyone say to you, look, Kasey, I'm a bit uncomfortable with things, or when you were pouring your heart out, was there good advice or anything? Probably, excuse me.
Not really. I think
Sorry, I'm very dry.
that's okay. Um, I think some of my girlfriends just got tired of me being a wimp and just not standing up to him. It was kind of like, you've got to stand up to him. And I was just so browbeaten by that point. And again, like when I was sick, some of the things that he said to me in terms of my character really, like it impacted me in ways that I can't even describe. I mean, I was always very confident. I took on jobs that I had absolutely no reason to be qualified for, but I would just take it. It was like, okay, yeah, I could do this,
Wing
and I
it.
did it. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. Um, and here I was in a marriage where suddenly he had control of all the purse strings, and I just it finally occurred to me, well, if he wanted to walk away or he wanted to divorce me, he would just say things that just kind of scorched me in ways. Um, and we were far enough away from family and most of my lifelong friends, because we lived in Pennsylvania, but I worked in New York. So once I stopped working there, most of my friend group kind of like shriveled up and died. I had very, very few friends, except for the friends that I had when I met them working at the school, a couple of teachers, a couple of students' moms. Um, but no one really knew the insides of my marriage.
of
So
course.
there was, yeah.
So for the people who sit back and go, "Oh, look, I've listened to all this terrible thing. For goodness sake, Kasey, even like your friends, why did you stay?" I mean, it's such a big question that everybody has. Look, if it's that bad, why don't you walk? So the victim blaming continues. And I
Hmm.
know you've started a fabulous initiative. Do you want to talk us through how that came to be in answer to that why did you stay question?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Because it wasn't until I started to write my memoir and again untangle things that I realized all of the misconceptions I had about abuse. I always thought of abuse as being someone like my neighbor. When I was 12, we had a neighbor whose husband beat her every single night. We could hear her screams coming through the wall. And she was this very petite Korean woman. She spoke no English. She never worked. She had 5 children under the age of 10. And my 12-year-old brain was like, well, why doesn't she just leave him if things are so bad? And it wasn't until I had moved back from Canada and had to answer to my husband for every dime he gave me that I realized she couldn't leave. Where was she going to go? And that is the biggest obstacle to so many women. These barriers are more financial. They're about like when somebody, he ruined our credit. We had no credit anymore because he had ran up credit card debt. I had no job. The economy was horrible at that point. Where was I going to go? Um, you know, it's very hard to make it as a single mother working at a place like Walmart, and I didn't even have a reliable car or a way to submit applications for jobs. So I started thinking back when I was writing the memoir about all of these times that I was very judgmental of other women until I got into that situation. And so after I wrote the memoir and I started talking to a lot of women who had read it and they were like, oh my God, it's like, you have no idea. I went through the same thing. And so many people identified with, what I had experienced with. And maybe it's because I have boy girl twins and I see the obstacles my daughter faces that my son never has to. Um, I just wanted to do more. I wanted to do something that took advantage of the lessons that I learned and things that I had experienced so that I could heal and say, look, it's all behind me. I can give you the benefit of my experiences and maybe prevent somebody else from experiencing what I did. So I started the initiative. It launched on April 15th and it's called I Know Why She Stayed. And the goal of the initiative is basically to allow people to understand the connection between financial abuse and domestic abuse. But there's another component that really weighs on the impact of financial abuse, and that is the gender pay gap, because we are paid less than men for the same work. And here in the US, I've heard two different figures. One is like 78 cents on a dollar, another one is 82 cents on a dollar. I know women of color sometimes make 50 cents
It's
on a
even worse.
dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By
And
the way, none of them are acceptable. Whatever the
no,
figure is, it should be
yeah,
dollar for work done. Absolutely. Agreed.
exactly. And right now there's a congresswoman that has written a bill to promote paycheck transparency, and we are almost 60 years. As of June 10th, it will be 60 years since the U.S. passed the Equal Pay Act, and very little has happened. So, my goal with the initiative is to really speak out about the connection between these three things, but also the ripple effect that the gender pay gap has. And how, if women had that $12,000 a year in their pocket that they should have had because they were being paid equally, they could possibly get their own apartment. Maybe it would give them a way to deal with an emergency. There's just so many things that you could do with like that extra $1,000 a month. Um,
And women
and
would also be reinvesting in their children and their communities
yes,
as well. So it would make, neighborhoods stronger. And,
yes,
from an outsider looking in at what's happening in the States at the moment, it's really distressing to see,
yeah,
what's happening in the country with, obviously the gun violence to start with, but the breakdown of families and the mental health
mm-hmm,
issues when we visit. It's terribly sad to witness what's happening over there. The homelessness and the panhandling when you walk
mm-hmm,
out of any hotel in a major city,
yeah,
you can't not see it when you're in the States
right.
now. So it is very distressing.
It is, and it's not what I want for my children. I feel like at my age, I don't have a lot to offer them because I still struggle financially. And, it's been 12 years since he passed away, and it took me a long, long time to kind of even get to the point where I'm living paycheck to paycheck, which is really good now,
Yeah, yeah.
But,
Well, I
but
mean, it's
yeah, I
new
finally
debts
got
to
to that
pay
point.
off, but I mean, there's plenty who aren't even covering. So I understand where you're coming from. So the book,
Yeah.
Kasey, for anyone who'd like to have a read of it, what was the name of your memoir?
It's called Our Better Selves: From Secrets to Lies to Healing and Forgiveness. And it's available on my website. I just happen to have it on sale if anybody's interested. And
Brilliant. I will make sure that those links are in the show
yeah,
notes. And you've also written a work of fiction, I believe, that incorporates the tenets of financial and domestic abuse in that. So that was The Colour of Frost, I believe.
yes, it is. And it's a work that I'm really, really proud of because it's it does deal with a lot of the same themes that I've dealt with personally, but it also is kind of a love letter to my children in a lot of ways because I try to show them through the main character, um, who's kind of a quirky, difficult person, with a lot of issues, but how to lead a life that is about more than just, about more than just yourself, that, developing a sense of community is so important, and giving back and rising above like the hatred and the bigotry that we see so prominently in this country right now. So The Color of Frost is really, I mean, I'm proud of my memoir, but I had to make up the entire The Color of Frost. So so that's
But a bit of lived
yeah.
experience thrown in. And for anybody
Yeah.
else, the initiative that you started, I know why she stayed.org. Have I got that correctly?
Yes, and it's all linked with my website, KaseyRogers.com. So if you forget I know why she stayed.org, you could always just Kasey Rogers, it's Casey
It's
with a
Casey.
K. Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
final parting wisdom for Casey, for someone who's listening to this going, oh my goodness, that's me. I don't know where to go next, where to turn, how to get out of this, what to do. Do you have some words of advice from someone who's lived it and come out the other side?
I think my first piece of advice is to stay safe because women are most vulnerable when they're leaving a relationship. That's when things escalate. And I know that from
Yep.
personal experience. So there are organizations out there and most websites that you would look into that have information about how you could leave have buttons on there so that you can click the button and get out of the browser really, really quickly.
Yes.
But trust your instincts, but stay safe because if you're compromised in a way, it might not just be you, it might also be your children that end up in harm's way. And then you never get a chance to leave. So,
Mm,
yeah,
very,
it
very
usually
important.
takes
Oh, and
women
often
7
overlooked.
times. Yeah, it's a process. 7 times is usually what it takes before a woman successfully leaves.
And
So,
that's just tragic in its own right, isn't it? Trying to,
hmm
do that. And then when you do, it's the promises and the lies that get you back, because you
hmm
do want to believe that this person you were completely in love with and shared a life with
hmm
isn't the person they've become. So, yeah,
yeah,
understandable. No, thank you so
yeah.
much for sharing your story with us, Casey. Really, really appreciate it. Any final words to wrap
You're-
up?
Um, one more thing I would like to say is that if you know of somebody that is in a situation and you can see it and they can't, understand that abuse is traumatic and they're not in their right minds right now. And you just said it perfectly. It's like, you're fighting instincts against somebody that you love and care for, and you have a very hard time understanding why they would be treating you that way. And it causes a lot of trauma. So don't judge them harshly. Give them your love and support. And you might not understand why they're still there, but be there for them and don't ask them the question, well, why don't you just leave?
I think that's beautiful, actually, to wrap up on that. If you are that friend and you can see it, knowing that even you're just a safe person to be able to download and vent to. And sometimes it takes a terrible incident to go, you know what, I'm done. I've now put that, that nail in the coffin. I'm ready to do something. And, not everybody's got their go bag packed or,
Mm-hmm.
has the ability to even have one ready to, some walk out with the clothes on their back and their kids in their arms. It's that,
Mm-hmm.
way to start over. So that's really beautiful advice for those who, are looking on, wondering, to not be judgmental. I think the world we live in now just needs more kindness from everybody. So beautiful advice to
Absolutely.
finish with, Casey. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
sharing with
much.
us.
Thanks,
Really
Amanda.
appreciate it.